Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another wild video. So a little bit after the expansion, I put out a video showing off some of my favorite wild decks, and it actually did a lot better than I was expecting it to. So that was kind of a nice unexpected surprise, since I've been really enjoying the wild format. I'm actually chilling on the leaderboard right now, 188. Did a lot of climbing with one of the decks we'll talk about here, but I wanted to do another kind of deck recommendation video talking about decks for all 10 classes this time, and just kind of what I recommend giving a shot, especially if you're someone who doesn't typically play wild. The standard meta seems pretty bad right now, and it sounds like it's only going to get worse, and balance changes are still probably at least another 2 weeks or so away for them. So if you're looking for something else to get your constructed fix, Wild's in a pretty great spot right now, in my opinion. I've had the most fun with the format that I've had in a long time. It's a lot of variety, a lot of cool decks, some new decks, some old decks that changed. So we're going to go through them all, and as always, the link to the deck codes will be in the description for all 10 decks here. We have one deck for every class, and there will also be some wild gameplay going up later this weekend, most likely. But yeah, we're going to get right on into the decks here. Before we do, if you enjoy this type of content, do remember to like and subscribe. It does a ton to help out the channel and keeps the videos coming. Yeah, without further ado, let's get right on into the top 10 post-nerf wild decks. So number one here is going to be a deck that actually hit rank 1 from Hijo, a very good standard player who pops into wild every now and again. This is Reno Shadow Thief Priest, and it's really good. It's surprisingly a very strong deck. I think a lot of people were really unsure if Reno was really going to be worth it, but it seems like he is, especially in these Reno decks, and I think this is the strongest Reno deck in the format right now. Reno Priest is finally back. It's a bit less of a combo focused deck, and now it is a bit more about disruption. That is kind of what all the thief cards are here for, like Thought Steal, Identity Theft, Lazul, Holmes, specifically the Harvester of Envy, which lets you steal opponents' cards, and then other very powerful tools like Theotar the Mad Duke. And we actually see some cards seeing play that we're not seeing play before in Wild. The Colossus for Priest seems to do pretty good. Keymaster here was Hijo's own personal tech inclusion. Not sure if it's core to the list or not, as a lot of the other lists haven't been running it, but it seemed to do all right for him. But really powerful deck, really feels like it has game versus most of the field. I think really the only decks you have trouble against are sometimes Quest Mage, if you can't disrupt them, or if, Big Priest high rolls before you can get your board clears online. But other than that, it really feels like outside of those two specific scenarios, it has a lot of game versus most of the field. List is still being refined. I don't think we're anywhere close to finding a perfect 40 yet. It's kind of the harder thing about these Reno decks is it takes longer to find a perfect list since we have 10 more cards to experiment with. But if you are a fan of Reno Priest and you like kind of stealing and disrupting what your opponent does, this is probably the deck for you. Fair warning though, it is not the most budget-friendly deck if you can't tell by the absurd amount of legendaries in here. I think like almost half the deck is legendaries, which is kind of insane. Some of them are free, obviously, like Reno and Murloc Holmes, Zola, Okani, so on and so forth, but still costs quite a bit of dust, so if you don't have most of the cards for it, I'd be a little bit weary of crafting, but it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. Seems like a very core part of the meta right now. Next up, we have a Reno aggro deck. If you don't know, Demon Hunter is probably the only class in Wild right now that doesn't really seem to be super viable. However, Reno Jackson, really good Wild player and content creator, did manage to do pretty decent with this list. It is a Reno deck, but it is very aggro focused, trying to make use of the new cool tools Demon Hunter got, and some which were actually buffed, like the Magnifying Glaive. So this is very much a aggro deck. It's trying to throw down its cards, go face, refill with the glaive, or even the new 4-drop here, which is a pretty cool card. There are a lot of greedy decks in Wild right now, like the Priest one I was just showing, so Glide really has gone up in value, being able to just rip their hand and replace it with 4 other cards. Pretty good, while often drawing you 3 to 4 cards yourself. So, cool deck. Again, Demon Hunter still pretty bad in Wild, but if you are set on trying something in Wild with Demon Hunter, this is probably the list I would recommend, as it seems to be the one that has been having the most success in the format. Then we have what is probably one of the best aggro decks or board-based decks in the game right now. Definitely top 3, I think, and that is even Totem Shaman. I believe this is also a list from Reno Jackson, though there have been some other variants floating around. Generally, the list is pretty similar. I think Cornelius Rome here is Reno's kind of spicy new inclusion, because the deck obviously doesn't have very much draw, so that's an attempt at giving it a little bit more draw power. But it is a very board-based deck. You're throwing down your totems, you're buffing them up with things like Totemic Might, Totemic Surge. You got some pretty good totem support in the set. Carving Chisel, very, very powerful card for sure. And then what I think is the most powerful card in the deck here is the Stonewright, which is giving all your totems +2 attack for the rest of the game, so it can be kind of used as a Savage Roar on a stick, because most of your board is going to be totems a lot of the time, and it's going to continue to give that effect for the rest of the game, which is very, very powerful. We also have the new Giganta Totem, or Gigantotem. That's how you say it. Just very powerful reward for spamming totems, which this deck is trying to do. That's like its whole thing. So I think it's a really fun deck. Definitely a strong deck. Seems to be putting up some very good stats right now. Looks like it is going to be one of the premier board-based aggressive decks in the format going forward. Next up, we have another Renathal deck. This is a Renathal Druid, and this is kind of a disruption version, playing some different stuff than a lot of the typical lists, but basically we have a new kind of win condition in Druid, whether that be just valuing them out with Topior and the things you get off your nature spells, and you're really just trying to trade in a bunch, and then you get your big Sire, and then you use Sire brand and just kill people with that. Sometimes you will just be able to win off of the board too, but definitely Sire is kind of the main win condition of the deck, though there are some versions out there running Malygos. One popular inclusion that is not in this list in particular, but does seem to be rising in play, is running actually old school set your opponent to 15 Alex, because now there's a lot more value in that with so many 40 HP decks going around. But yeah, this version of the deck is a little bit more disruption focused, so it's trying to use its disruption tools like Theotar, Dirty Rat, and Mutanus, and then we even have something like Barista here to rebuy those effects. Floop as well can double as any of these effects, or even double as your Denathrius for a late game finish. So really powerful deck. Interesting to see the direction Druid is going in. Again, I don't think it's been established which of the Druid lists is the end-all be-all. That's still kind of being determined, but it does seem like this Dragon package has been very effective and successful, so I expect to see more of it going forward into the future as it gets further refined. But definitely really solid Druid list if you want to try out some Druid. Next up, we have an old classic coming back around, Odd Paladin. So this archetype was basically entirely brought back from the dead with the buff to Warhorse Trainer. I know this didn't do very much in Standard, but in Wild, it basically revived the deck because this effect is nuts. The fact that you're giving all your Silverhand recruits +2 attack on its own, that's already a pretty significant effect. But then you can give them Taunt as well, and that just protects the Warhorse Trainer, makes it so if they don't have a silence or some kind of spell to get around the taunt, or like AoE, there's just no way to deal with your board. Like they have to trade into the Silverhand recruits, and that never feels very good, and then you're just spitting out a bunch more of them the next turn. Really surprisingly decent deck. I don't think it's top tier, but is definitely playable and can win some games. I'd say maybe like lower tier 2 or something like that, but it's pretty decent. And since Odd Paladin wasn't very good before, this is a welcome surprise to see it come back. We do have some other new cards in here. We have Sinful Soul Chef as a new 1-drop, and we also have Promotion, which has been pretty decent given how many Silverhand recruits are being used in this deck. You could experiment with the new legendary as well, but I personally felt he has felt a little bit too slow for Wild as a format. But really solid aggro deck. If you have some nostalgic for Odd Paladin, not a bad time to revisit it. So for Warlock hasn't been as popular as it used to be, but it is still a strong class with a variety of decent decks. There are a lot of weird Reno lists going around. There's some new 40-card Dark Glare versions and stuff, and I think both of those decks are fine. But I think this is one of the better decks that is utilizing new cards, and that is Mecha'thun. So Mecha'thun lock, trying to use Mecha'thun here, draw your whole deck, then you get Mecha'thun down and discard your hand in the same turn, and blow up the board, and then you win with Cataclysm. So pretty good. It hasn't changed a whole lot, but the one card that did get added, which has seemed to do pretty well for the deck, has been Tome Tampering. Shuffling 1-cost copies of your cards into your hand, or into your deck, and then discarding your hand. This can be used to kind of pull through your deck a bit faster and have your cards be cheaper so you can play them and get to that win condition a little bit faster. Other than that, the deck hasn't changed too much, but given we are seeing a rise in some more board-based decks, and this has a lot of kind of anti-aggro, anti-board-based tools, I think it has a chance to be decently well positioned for the meta. Then we have what might be my favorite deck of the new expansion so far, and that is the new version of Beast, or as it is sometimes better known, Copper Hunter. This deck is awesome. It's probably my favorite aggro / board-based deck in the format. Incredibly strong. Surprisingly, some new cards are seeing play in it. I'll be honest, I did not have many high thoughts on Huntsman Altamore when he was first released. I didn't think he was going to be very good, but surprisingly, he has put in quite a lot of work in this deck. I don't think he's core, but he definitely is good if you have him. I think he is a core card, rather, but if you don't have him, he is replaceable, and the deck can still do well without him. Probably a better way to say it. The Colossal has been really insane in this deck. Basically, your best cards in this deck are Harpoon Gun and Starving Buzzard. Harpoon Gun reducing your next beast most of the time by 3 is insane. It allows for some complete blowouts with a cheap Tundra Rhino for insane charge damage and whatnot, as well as some cheap Hydrolodons, or even just a free Buzzard, which lets you draw a ton of cards, because we have beasts that summon multiple beasts. We got wBIaDBQAA and Alley Cat, so those become 1-mana draw 2s, and it's just really strong. The deck really appreciates the addition of the Wild Seeds. We have the Spirit Poachers, as well as Wild Spirits and Aralon, and the Wild Seeds have been good, even after losing 1 attack on the weapon for one of the Wild Seed summons. Still really good, still really powerful, and Tavish, also really strong hero card, and gives us some game against Quest Mage, because if we can get them down to 1 HP and get up an explosive trap, they often are not able to win the game unless they have some weird tech like the Varden Hero or an Armor Smith. One notable thing about this version of Beast Hunter is it has Spring Paws. I don't think Spring Paws are really that powerful of a card, but in my time playing the deck, I was running into a lot of other board-based decks, and Spring Paws were very useful for me, especially in growing the Scavenging Hyena. However, they are not necessarily the best card in the world, so if you're looking for something to put in instead, if you're not running it, especially if you're not running into as many board-based decks, Timberwolf is an all-star in this deck, so you could probably swap out the Spring Paws with Timberwolves, and the deck would still do very well. Another 1-drop that has been very popular and powerful in versions of this deck in the past has been Pelican Diver, which is kind of funny. I think a lot of people really slept on that card during its release, and it was actually pretty good. So that's another possible 1-drop you could include that has been in the deck before and still feels like a very powerful card. But yeah, Beast Hunter, really powerful. That's the deck I use mostly to climb, and it's probably the deck I'll be featuring later on this weekend, most likely. Really fun deck, really strong, highly recommend it. Then we have a new take on Miracle Rogue. This one comes from someone who hit #1 on, I think they actually hit #1 and #2 on China, and it's a pretty nuts deck. It's taking advantage of the recently buffed Edwin Defias Kingpin, going to 3 mana. Card is absolutely insane. We also have OG Edwin here, and it's pretty remarkable how consistently this deck pops off. We do also have the Maestra Wildpole Gnaw package, as it does give us some free stuff to keep the Edwin trains rolling and fight for the board on top of it. Deck is very low cost, low to the ground. That's kind of because we're trying to abuse Edwin as much as possible, make big units, hope they can't answer them, blow them out in a turn or two. It's a very fun deck to play if you enjoy the standard Miracle Rogue style of play, where you're playing a lot of cards in one turn and killing your opponent shortly afterwards. This is probably a good deck for you. Sinstone Graveyard has also been very, very powerful because it naturally synergizes with what this deck is trying to do. Just play a lot of cards in one turn, rewards you for that, really nice. Just a very powerful, strong deck. Definitely not the easiest thing to play in the world. Miracle decks are usually a little bit trickier to play, not always the most straightforward, but if you can figure it out, you will probably do pretty well with it. Seems very decent into the current format, and uses a lot of cool new cards, like the Necrolord Draka, the Location, and even Door of Shadows. Next up, we have our Mage list. So obviously Quest Mage, still a good deck, and some people are experimenting with the new 1-drop that we got in the recent set, the Suspicious Alchemist. I think people have been having decent success, so if you are a Quest Mage enjoyer, this could be a card you try out in that, but the list I've been playing has actually been a Secret Mage list. I think Corbett is the one who came up with this one in particular. Really neat list. I don't think Secret Mage is that great, but against certain things, sometimes the disruption is enough, and you do just kind of tempo them out. It's nowhere near as strong as it was a couple years ago when everyone was complaining about it, but it can win games. It's not a bad deck. It's pretty decent overall, and it uses some new cards like the Orion Mansion Manager, as well as Chatty Bartender, which has been a pretty sweet inclusion overall, and Anonymous Informant, which has been surprisingly strong in my own personal experience with the deck. Again, not the most amazing deck in the world, but you can win games with it, and it is a little nostalgic playing Secret Mage after all this time, because Secret Mage hasn't been good in a very, very long time, and now it feels at least kind of playable. So that is nice for our Secret Mage enjoyers. And then last but not least, we have a kind of aggressive warrior deck, which is cool because warrior has been a pretty dead class in Wild for a while. I think this is another Reno Jackson list. He comes up with some great deck lists. This is one I've actually played a decent bit with and have been pretty impressed with the results of. I do think that the kind of thing that carries this deck incredibly hard are your risky skippers. Skipper's just so good, especially when you combo it with our new card here, Anima Extractor. You can make just really huge things in your hand. Also, in the recent buff patch, we got Imbued Axe being buffed as well, so now the weapon gives +1/+2 by default, and then +2/+2 if it's infused. This weapon's really powerful. I've really enjoyed playing with it. It makes your board of smaller dudes threatening really fast. You can also gain a lot of armor with things like Armor Smith and Ethereum Rover, since you're damaging all your guys a lot. And the Warrior Location buff has also been nice as well, getting a bit more extra attack out of it, which is pretty sweet. Just overall, really like this deck. It's fun having kind of a tempo warrior be viable again. I know the buffs didn't really seem to be enough for warrior in standard, but they actually made a pretty significant difference to it in Wild, even though it is still one of the less popular classes. But yeah, that is our last deck list for this video. So we got a deck for all 10 classes here. They're all really fun decks, and they've all had pretty decent success from what I've seen. So if you're looking to dip your toe into Wild for the first time, or you're returning after a while of not playing Wild, definitely recommend it. I think The format's in a really good place right now. It's really interesting, a lot of diversity, a lot of cool decks, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where it goes from here. So that is pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. As always, the links to all these codes will be in the description, so if any of these decks look cool to you, you can find them down there, grab them, copy them into Hearthstone, you're good to go. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.